Welcome to another episode of Viatorian Voices, where our conversations on the way give witness to the ministry and spirituality of walking with youth and those who go underserved. In this episode, we hear from Father Mark Francis, CSV. Father Mark professed first vows in 1976, a year in which there was also a general chapter. This is the meeting held every 6 years where the congregation of the Clerics of St. Viator discuss key questions for its operations and future and elect its worldwide leadership. It so happens that Father Mark has gone on to attend every general chapter of the congregation since 1976. After participating in previous chapters as a translator, an elected delegate of our province, and as Superior General following his election in 2000 and re-election in 2006, Father Mark was at this past summer's chapter as Provincial Superior of our province. Over these 9 general chapters, he has seen a lot, and we wanted to share his long-reaching perspective with you. I'm Pre-Associate Dan Masterton, and I'm your host for this conversation. After you enjoy this episode, help us tell the Viatorian story by rating our podcast in your favorite app, sending this episode link to a friend, and praying for and encouraging young men considering Viatorian religious life. I started this conversation by asking Father Mark to further define the general chapter and orient those of us who aren't familiar with it. Enjoy!
No, the general chapter is the highest organization of governance in the congregation, and it meets every 6 years, and it's composed of 40 delegates. There's a statistical kind of thing that allots delegates to various parts of the congregation. The 6-year meeting basically is to touch base with everyone in terms of how the mission is going, where we need to go, what God is calling us to do. As the congregation has changed over the years, so has the composition of the general chapter. And when I was in the first general chapter I attended as a translator, there are absolutely no people of color in the whole group, because there are 40 delegates, but then there are also about 20 staff people that help with the meeting. This last chapter, 2024, over a third of the delegates were from the Global South, and almost more than half of the staff people were from the Global South. And so it was a remarkable change and shift in terms of when you just look out over the audience, out over the delegates, they very, very much did change over these years. And they also became younger. Because traditionally, most of the delegates were people who were of a certain age. They're in the 50s and 60s. Now, because of the movement of the congregation into the Global South, most of the guys in that part of the congregation are younger. And so I'd say the age went down at least 10 or 20. The average age went down about 10, 20 years.
Okay, so what if we start by going back a few years to the first general chapter you went to? What year was that in, and how would you describe what that one gathering was like that many years ago?
The first general chapter I went to is 1978. It was the chapter at which we rewrote the Constitution of the congregation. It was really a wonderful chapter. I really was privileged to be there for it. We met in this place called the Centro Nazareth outside of Rome. Very nice place, owned by the Focolare movement. You might be familiar with them. But the various committees, of course, are always established to study the various questions, and in this case, the various parts. There was a real feeling of starting something new, because Vatican II had taken place a decade before, and this was trying to refashion the Constitution in accord with the movements of the Spirit in the Second Vatican Council. And so there's a great deal of enthusiasm. I remember the liturgies, though. The liturgies were interesting in the sense that most of the Mass parts, when we sang, were sung in Latin. And very beautiful, but it was something I had not been used to before. But people, there's a real feeling of fraternity and togetherness, as we were doing this. But also, there are the old how should I put it in a charitable way, the Brahmins of the various provinces there are several of them who were kind of somewhere in canon law, somewhere in theology or whatever. But they kind of make debating points in the course of the discussion.
Sure.
So it kind of went back and forth, and that was kind of interesting to see as well. And we had our own Brahmins at that point too. So the Americans were not exempt from that. So that first chapter, as I said, it was a wonderful experience, and it was one of those formative moments for me as a religious, just to be at least to listen to the debate about rewriting the Constitution.
Yeah, and so the Constitution is the one that we still use today that goes back, over 4 decades. Just for people who aren't familiar with what a constitution serves as in religious life, it has some of the rules and regulations, some of the things that province leadership and others who are in governance in the community are looking to for standards and the ways that the provinces and the congregation operate. What else would you say about what you'd find in a constitution if someone wanted to crack open the book?
Well, it's trying to define and describe what the congregation's all about as well, basically. And so, for example, in the previous legislation, going back to the founder, the purpose of the congregation, for example, was service of youth and the holy altar. That is explained and kind of described in that way. Basically, the new purpose of the congregation, according to the new constitution, was raising communities where the faith is lived, deepened, and celebrated. And so it says sort of the same thing, but just very, very different in terms of it's much more outward looking and dynamic. And so that kind of change kind of represents what this new constitution represented for us.
Right. Yeah. A modernization of the same charism, but brought into a more modern context. So moving forward from the 70s and, into the 80s and 90s and closer to this day and age, how did you see the congregation evolve through these kind of 6-year milestones? What did little changes or little adjustments or representation did you see evolve in little ways, maybe one chapter at a time or a couple chapters at a time, as you saw different gatherings of men come together every 6 years?
One of the key concerns of all those chapters after 1978 was giving voice to what we call the foundations, those areas that were founded by the provinces, but to make sure that the people in those foundations had a voice in what the general chapter was going to decide. Most of the people in the earlier chapters were themselves from the provinces. They were missionaries. But over the past 20 years, that has changed, and now we have the native peoples from those various foundations who have become delegates and have voice in the chapter. So that's been kind of a constant change, but it was a concern of the chapter always to give them a decent opportunity to voice their concerns, and so to expand the representation from the foundations.
Yeah, when I was learning the language of the congregation, being used to the idea of a mission and then hearing the word foundation from the way we do ministry, I thought it was neat to think of not us going and setting up shop, almost like, building a well for people and then leaving them to do it themselves, whether they know how to tend it or not. It's more about, can we plant the charism in a country, help the church that already is there learn and embrace the charism and find people who have a response to it through priesthood or religious life or association. And then you have this foundation springing up within the country in its own context, rather than, Americans trying to build an American satellite church in Colombia. We have a different dialogical thing. So to see that also reflected in the chapter, I'm sure was kind of a wrestling or a struggling to try to make that all line up or reflect that too.
And that's interesting too, because each foundation has their own story. At the beginning, the French who founded the foundation in the Ivory Coast didn't think that they wanted to establish something permanent. They were there to help the church, and then after they had built churches and all that, they turned everything over to Ivorians and then go back to France. But it was only in the 1970s and 80s that there's a different policy that was established where we were going to try to invite Ivorians to become part of the congregation and continue the mission as Viatorians. So that is just an interesting kind of shift in terms of, at least in that one foundation, about what happened. And now there are over 40 people in the Ivory Coast.
Yeah, of native vocations who have become Viatorians from that country. And thinking of our province, a Colombian priest from our province now will serve on the General Council. And that progress is another thing that I'm sure you've seen over time. So then if you look to 2024 in this chapter that just convened a few months ago, what were Viatorians saying as they came together in Rome? What kind of questions came up on this chapter's agenda? And then what was the process like towards the election that eventually named our new Superior General and his council?
Well, this chapter was unique in the sense it started and the methodology was a bit different from previous chapters. We spent a whole week in retreat, just praying about the congregation, our mission, what God is calling us to do, and that served us very well, I think, for the decision-making part of the meeting which followed. I was very impressed with the facilitators because they had a whole method for helping us do this.
And they were not Viatorians.
One was a Jesuit and one was a laywoman. And they were used to this kind of process.
Yeah.
So they were very helpful. I was very happy with the results of that because it pointed us into areas where many times in previous chapters we never went, in the sense of really profoundly thinking and praying about certain aspects of our lives. Because previous chapters, for the most part, tended to be legislative.
Okay.
And they tended to be more juridical in terms of, changing regulations or making statements or things like that. This became much more dialogical in the sense of kind of sharing back and forth and really sharing the fruits of prayer with one another. The whole method in terms of spiritual listening, which was basically the method that has been adopted for the Synod in Rome. So we felt also part of this larger movement in the church of synodality, of giving everybody a voice and really trying to discern the movement of the Spirit among us.
So we end up with an election for a Superior General. Would you teach us your best way to pronounce his name correctly when we're maybe praying for him or reading his name in articles?
The new general is called Nestor Fils-Aime.
Okay. And he is originally from Haiti, in our foundation in Haiti, which is part of the province of Canada, and he served in leadership in the province of Canada. How would you describe what is before him now? What is the context that he and the General Council are looking at for these next 3 to 6 years? What kind of questions or challenges are they going to tackle? Or maybe do you have a sense of some of the spiritual gifts or things that they feel enthusiastic and passionate about that they want to bring to the provinces and foundations, just in the way they do their visits and consultations too?
Yeah, I mean, he's what happens in chapters many times is we call for a study of something, and then we say, and we give to the General Council the care of doing the study. So a lot of things were mandated by the chapter for the General Council to do in the coming years. The major challenge right now, at least from my point of view, is just prior to the chapter, there was the announcement of the formation of 3 regions in the congregation. And a region is a higher level of autonomous organization within the congregation. And the 3 regions are Haiti, Ivory Coast, and Burkina Faso. So these 3 areas have become semi-autonomous from their provinces and self-governing to a certain extent. And they fulfill all of the requisites for being independent, except for being totally financially independent. And so this is not unusual. And in a certain sense, it reflects in microcosm what the church is dealing with in the whole world. In the sense the resources and expertise and all that, much of what we have in that area is in the north. It's in the provinces. But we need to find a way of sharing that with the global South.
Right.
And this is something that the new General Council is going to have to be really conscious of and promoting. So, I mean, this has been going on for a long time, but it's really obvious now in terms of what needs to be done. And I'm very optimistic in terms of the growth of the various regions, and they will eventually become provinces in the way things are planned. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
And then is there anything in particular that you and maybe the other Americans or Colombians are going to bring home from your experience in Rome or with the global congregation? Is there any stories that you find yourself passing along to other men and associates who are here, or anything that came to you in prayer and liturgy and discussion that is going to kind of impact your leadership or your ministry when you're back here in the United States and Colombia?
Well, I think the thrust of the chapter, and it's kind of expressed in the priority that was really worked out by the chapter that right after the retreat, in terms of, why are we here? Let me just share that with you. Priority for the next 6 years is basically a statement, and it's a kind of an inspirational statement. Rooted in Christ, we are called to build authentic fraternity to fully live out our mission. This combination of community life, good relationships within the community among ourselves, as an intrinsic part of helping us to do the mission that we've been given.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it makes a great deal of sense. And anything that we can do to help that is really important. It seems something that's obvious in the past. This is all true before, but I think to focus on it for the next 6 years is going to be helpful.
That's all for this episode of Viatorian Voices. We'd like to thank Father Mark for his witness and his leadership, and we pray for his continued wisdom and discernment in servant leadership of the Viatorians. Viatorian Voices Conversations on the Way is a production of Viatorian Vocation Ministry. The Viatorians are professed brothers and priests, together with women and men lay associates, who proclaim Jesus Christ and his gospel, and raise communities where faith is lived, deepened, and celebrated. In the footsteps of Venerable Louis Querbes, and under the patronage of St. Viator, we strive to do everything well, so that through us, Jesus may be adored and loved. This includes our General Council, which oversees the worldwide congregation day to day. Every 6 years, the General Chapter, which is the supreme authority for the congregation, convenes delegates elected by their brothers from every country where we serve. They discuss key questions for the operations and future of the congregation, and elect a Superior General, who gathers a General Council to serve as congregational leadership for his term. This group meets often and frequently visits various provincial headquarters and ministries to support and consult with Viatorians. To learn more, visit viatorians-international.org. To learn more about our community, visit viatorians.com or follow us on social media at ViatorianUSA. Young adults seeking to connect with faith-filled peers can request to follow at ViatorianYA on the Way on Instagram, where our young adult community is building new pathways for walking together in faith. Those seeking support and accompaniment in exploring God's invitation for them are invited to reach out to Vocation Ministry. Send us a DM on social media or email us to start a conversation. Remember, you can help us tell the Viatorian story by rating our podcast in your favorite app, sending this episode link to a friend, and praying for and encouraging young men considering Viatorian religious life. On behalf of Brother Peter and the Viatorian community, I'm Pre-Associate Dan Masterton. Venerable Louis Querbes, inspire us. St. Viator, pray for us. Adored and loved be Jesus.